Sorry, I've gotten a little distracted with other passion projects. Um, I know I read the first part of 17, so I'm gonna reread it just for continuity. Already did, but that was like half a month ago. Like it was a while ago. So let's try. I really do want to finish chapter 17. Okay. So a week passed and no news arrived of Mr. Rochester. 10 days and still he did not come. Mrs. Fairfax said she should not be surprised if he were to go straight from the Leas to London and thence to Continent and not show his face again at Thornfield for a year to come. He'd not unfrequently quitted in a manner quite abrupt and unexpected. When I heard this, I was beginning to feel a strange chill and failing in the heart. I was actually permitting myself to experience a sickening sense of disappointment. But rallying my wits and recollecting my principles, I had once called my sensations to order, and it was wonderful how I got over the temporary blunder. How I cleared up this mistake of supposing Mr. Rochester's movements a matter in which I had any cause to take a vital interest. Not that I humbled myself by a slavish notion of inferiority. On the contrary, I just said, "You have nothing to do with the master of Thornfield, further than to receive the salary he gives you for teaching his protege, and to be grateful for such respectful and kind treatment as, if you do your duty, you have a right to expect at his hands. Be sure that it is the only tie he seriously acknowledges between you and him. So don't make him the object of your fine feelings, your raptures, agonies, and so forth. He's not of your order. Keep to your caste, and be too self-respecting to lavish the love of the whole heart, soul, and strength, where such a gift is not wanted and would be despised." Jane is strong. I went on with my day's business tranquilly, but ever and anon vague suggestions kept wandering across my brain of reasons why I should quit Thornfield. I'd be ready to quit too. And I kept involuntarily framing advertisements and pondering conjectures and new situations. These thoughts I did not think it necessary to check. They might germinate and bear fruit if they could. Mr. Rochester had been absent upwards of a fortnight when the post brought Mrs. Fairfax a letter. "It is from the master," said she, as she looked at the direction. "Now I suppose we shall know whether we are to expect his return or not." Okay, so Jane is being her typical, strategic, realistic self. Anyways, it says, and while she broke the seal and pursued the document, I went on taking my coffee. We were at breakfast. It was hot, and I attributed to that circumstance a fiery glow which suddenly rose to my face, while my hand shook, and why I involuntarily spit half the contents of my cup into my saucer, I did not choose to consider. Well, I sometimes think we are too quiet, but we run a chance of being busy enough now, for a little while at least," said Mrs. Fairfax, still holding the note between her spectacles. Ere I permitted myself to request an explanation, I tied the having helped her also to another. Okay, she's helping Adele at the moment. I don't know why I'm so tongue tied. She gave Adele another breakfast item, and continuing on, she says nonchalantly, "Mr. Rochester is not likely to return soon, I suppose." "Indeed, he is. In 3 days, he says. That will be the next Thursday, and not alone either. I don't know how many of these fine people at the Leas are coming with him. He sends directions for all the best bedrooms to be prepared, and the library and drawing rooms are to be cleaned out. And I am to get more kitchen hands from the George Inn at Millcote, and from wherever else I can. And the ladies will bring their maids, and the gentlemen their valets, so we shall have a full house of it." And Mrs. Fairfax swallowed her breakfast and hastened away to commence operations. The 3 days were, as she had foretold, busy enough. I had thought all the rooms at Thornfield beautifully clean and well arranged, but it seems I was mistaken. 3 women were got to help in such scrubbing, such brushing, such washing of paint and beating of carpets, such taking down and putting up pictures, such polishing of mirrors and lustres, such lighting of fires and bedrooms, such airing of sheets. Give me an example. I'm sorry, my sister's texting me. Such airing of sheets and feather beds of earths I never beheld, either before or since. Adele ran quite wild in the midst of it. The preparations for company and the prospect of their arrival seemed to throw her into ecstasies. She would have Sophie to look over her toilettes, and as she called her frocks, to furbish up any that were passés, and to air and arrange the new. For herself, she did nothing but caper about in front of chambers, jump on and off of bedsteads, and lie on mattresses and roaring in the chimneys. From school duties, she was exonerated. Mrs. Fairfax had pressed me into her service, and I was all day. From school duties, she was exonerated. Mrs. Fairfax had pressed me into her service, and I was all day in the storeroom helping or hindering her, and the cook, learning to make custards and cheesecakes and French pastry, to truss game and garnish dessert dishes. The party were expected to arrive on Thursday afternoon in time for dinner at 6. During the intervening period, I had no time to nurse chimeras, and I believed I was as active and as gay as anybody, Adele excepted. Still, now and then, I received a dampening check to my cheerfulness, and was, in spite of myself, thrown back on the region of doubts and portents and dark conjectures. This was when I chanced to see the third-story staircase door, which of late had always been kept locked, open slowly and give passage to the form of Grace Poole, and prim cap, a right apron, and handkerchief. When I watched her glide down the gallery, her quiet tread muffled in a list slipper, when I saw her look into the bustling, topsy-turvy bedrooms, to say a word, perhaps to the charwoman, about the proper way to polish a grate, or clean a marble mantelpiece, or take stains from papered walls, and then pass on, she would thus descend to the kitchen once a day, eat her dinner, smoke a moderate pipe on the earth, and go back, carrying her pot of porter with her, for her private solace, in her own gloomy upper haunt. Only 1 hour in the 24 did she pass with the fellow servants below. All the rest of her time was spent in some low-ceiled oaken chamber on the 3rd story. There she sat and sewed, and probably laughed drearily to herself, as companionless as the prisoner in his dungeon. Anyways, the strangest thing of all was that not a soul in the house except me noticed her habits or seemed to marvel at them. No one discussed her position or employment. No one pitied her solitude or isolation. I once indeed overheard part of the dialogue between Leah and one of the charwomen. Overheard part of the dialogue between Leah and one of the charwomen, of which Grace formed the subject. Leah had been saying something I hadn't caught, and the charwoman remarked, "She gets good wages, I guess." "Yeah," said Leah. "I wish I had as good. Not that mine are to complain of. There's no stinginess at Thornfield. But they're not 1/5 of the sum Mrs. Poole receives, and she is laying by. She goes every quarter to the bank at Millcote. I should not wonder but she has saved enough to keep her independent if she liked to leave. But I suppose she's got used to the place, and then she's not even 40 yet, and strong and able for anything." Okay, so Grace Poole makes bank. She stays to herself. What's to complain about? "She's as good a hand, I dare say," said the charwoman. "Ah, she understands what she has to do. Nobody better," rejoined Leah significantly. "And it is not everyone could fill her shoes, not for all the money she gets." "That it is not," was the reply. "I wonder whether Master—" The charwoman was going on, but here Leah turned and perceived me, and she instantly gave her companion a nudge. "Doesn't she know?" I heard the woman whisper. Leah shook her head, and the conversation was of course dropped. All I had gathered from it amounted to this, that there was a mystery at Thornfield, and that from participation in that mystery I was purposely excluded. Thursday came. All work had been concluded in the previous evening. Carpets were laid down, bed hangings festooned, radiant white counterpane spread, toilet tables arranged, furniture rubbed, flowers piled in vases. Both chambers and saloons looked as fresh and bright as hands could make them. The hall, too, was scoured, and the great carved clock, as well as the steps and banisters and the staircases, were polished to the brightness of glass in the dining room. The sideboard flashed resplendent with plate, and the drawing room and boudoir. Vases of exotics bloomed on all sides. Afternoon arrived. Mrs. Fairfax assumed her best black satin gown, her gloves, and her gold wash, for it was her part to receive the company, to conduct the ladies to their rooms. Adele, too, would be dressed, though I thought she had little chance of being introduced to the party that day at least. However, to please her, I allowed Sophie to apparel her in one of her short, full muslin frocks. For myself, I had no need to make any change. I should not be called upon to quite my sanctum of the room, for schoolroom. Oh my God. Anyway, she says she would be drawn about, like no one cares. She thinks no one cares, so she just put on a pleasant refuge. Wait, what? She just put on some plain. I'm sorry. Oh my God. I'm trying to make it through 17. It had been a mild, serene spring day, one of those days which towards the end of March or the beginning of April rise shining over the earth as heralds of summer. It was drawing to an end now, but the evening was even warm, and I sat at work in the schoolroom with the window open. "It gets late," says Mrs. Fairfax, entering the rustling state. "I am glad I ordered dinner an hour after the time Mr. It was a mild March day, beginning of April, almost spring. It was drawing to an end now, but the evening was warm, and I sat at work in the schoolroom with the window open. Miss Fairfax says it's late. I'm glad I ordered dinner an hour after the time Mr. Rochester mentioned, for it's past 6 now. I've sent John down to the gates to see if there's anything on the road. One can see a long way from thence in the direction of Millcote." She went to the window. "Here he is," she said. "Well, John, leaning out, any news?" "They're coming, ma'am," was the answer. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. Adele flew to the window. I followed, taking care to stand on one side, so that screened by the curtain I could see without being seen. The 10 minutes John had given seemed very long, but at last wheels were heard. 4 equestrians galloped up the drive, and then out came from 2 anyways the people were here. Fluttering veils and waving plumes filled the vehicles. 2 of the cavaliers were young, dashing looking gentlemen. The third was Mr. Rochester on his black horse. Monsieur Pilot by I'm going to skip ahead because I know I recorded this, so I'm just going to... I lied, I can't find it. Anyways, so we see Pilot bounding before him, at his side a lady, and he and she were in first of the party. It says, "Her purple riding habit almost swept the ground. Her veil streamed long on the breeze, mingling with its transparent folds, and gleaming through them shone rich raven ringlets." Obviously, Blanche Ingram. "Miss Ingram," exclaimed Mrs. Fairfax, and away she hastened to her post below. The cavalcade, following the sweep of the drive, quickly turned the angle of the house, and I lost sight of it. Adele now in position to go down, but I took her on my knee and gave her to understanding that she must not on any account think of venturing into sight of these ladies, either now or at any other time, unless expressly sent for, that Mr. Rochester would be very angry. Some natural tears she shed on being told this, but as I began to look very grave, she consented at last to wipe them. A joyous stir was now audible in the hall. Gentlemen's deep tones and ladies' silvery accents bent harmoniously together, and distinguishable above all, though not loud, was the sonorous voice of the master of Thornfield Hall, welcoming his fair and gallant guests under its roof. Then light steps ascended the stairs, and there was a tripping through the gallery, and soft, cheerful laughs, and opening and closing of doors, and for a time a hush. Elle changeante de toilette, said Adele, who listened actively, had followed every movement, and she sighed. Ches maman, she said, quand il y va du monde, je le sauvat partout al saloon, et à l'ouest chanvies. I can't speak French, but Adele is. She says, don't you feel hungry, Adele? Something, mademoiselle. Well, now, while the ladies are at their rooms, I'll venture down and get you something to eat. And issuing from my asylum with precaution, I sought a back stairs which concluded directly to the kitchen. All in that region were fire and commotion, the soup and fish in the last stage of projection, and the cook hung over her crucibles in a frame of mind and body threatening spontaneous combustion. In the servants' hall, 2 coachmen and 3 gentlemen stood or sat round the fire. The Abigails, I suppose, were upstairs with their mistresses. The new servants that had been hired from Millcote were bustling about everywhere. Threading this chaos, I at last reached the larder. There she took possession of cold chicken, a roll of bread, some tarts, a plate or 2, and a knife and a fork for Adele, and with this booty I made a hasty retreat. I had regained the gallery and was just shutting the back door behind me when an accelerated hum warned me that the ladies were about to issue from their chambers. I could not proceed into the schoolroom without passing some of their doors and running the risk of being surprised with my cargo of victualage. So I stood at this end, which, being windowless, was dark, quite dark now, for the sun was set and twilight was gathering. Presently, the chambers gave up their fair tenants one after another. Each one came out gaily and airily, with dress that gleamed lustrous through the dusk. For a moment they stood grouped together in the extremity of the gallery, conversing in a key of sweet, subdued vivacity, though they descended the staircase almost as noiselessly, as bright as mist rolls down the hill. Their collective appearance had left on me an impression of high-born elegance such as I had never before received. I found Adele peeping through the schoolroom door which had been held ajar. "What beautiful ladies!" she cried in English. "Oh, I wish I might go to them. Do you think Mr. Rochester will send for us after dinner?" "No, indeed, I don't. Mr. Rochester has something else to think about. Never mind the ladies tonight. Perhaps you will think about them tomorrow. Here is your dinner." She was really hungry, so the chicken and tarts served to divert her attention for a time, and I was I scourged this voyage, or both she, I, and Sophie, to whom I conveyed a share of our repast, would have run a chance of getting no dinner at all. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Sometimes I get lost. Okay, she's saying no one would have fed them because the dessert was not carried out till after 9, and 10 the footmen came running to and fro. So basically everyone was so busy that they wouldn't have eaten if she hadn't gotten them any food. I allowed Adele to sit up much later than usual, for she declared she could not possibly go to sleep while the doors kept opening and shutting below and people bustling about. Besides, she added, a message might possibly come from Mr. Rochester when she undressed. Et alors quel dommage. I don't know what that means. I told her stories as long as I could, and as long as she would listen to them. And then for a change I took her out into the gallery. The hall lamp was lit now, and it amused her to look over the page. When the evening was far advanced, a sound of music issued from the drawing room, whither the piano had been removed. Adele and I sat on the top of the step of the stairs to listen. Presently, a voice blent with rich tones of the instrument. It was a lady who sang, and very sweet her notes were. The solo over, a duet followed, and then a glee. A joyous conversational murmur filled up the intervals. I listened long. Suddenly, I discovered that my ear was wholly intent on analyzing the mingled sounds and trying to discriminate amidst the confusion of accents those of Mr. Rochester. And when it caught them, which it soon did, it found a further task in framing the tones, rendered by distance inarticulate into words. She's trying to listen to what her man say, what he's saying, how he's saying it, who he's saying it to. The clock struck 11. I looked at Adele, whose head leaned against my shoulder. Adele sounds so cute. Her eyes were waxing heavy, so I took her up in my arms and carried her off to bed. It was near 1 before the gentlemen and ladies sought their chambers. The next day was as fine as its predecessor. It was devoted by the party to an excursion to some site in the neighborhood. They set out early in the forenoon, some on horseback and the rest on carriages. I witnessed both the departure and the return. Miss Ingram, as before, was the only lady equestrian, and as before, Mr. Rochester galloped at her side. The two rode a little apart from the rest. I pointed out this circumstance to Mrs. Fairfax, who, standing at the window, said to me, "You said it was not likely they should think of being married," said I, "but you see Mr. Rochester evidently prefers her to any of the other ladies." "Yes, I dare say, no doubt he admires her." "And she him," I added. "Look how she leans her head towards him as if they were conversing confidently. I wish I could see her face. I've never had a glimpse of it yet." "You will see her this evening," said Mrs. Fairfax. "I wish to be introduced to the ladies and..." Wait, hold on. Oh, she said, "I happened to remark to Mr. Rochester how much Adele wanted to be introduced to the ladies, and he said, 'Oh, let her come into the drawing room after dinner and request Miss Eyre to accompany her.' Yes, he said that from mere politeness I need not go, I'm sure," I answered. Okay, so anyways, Jane trying to talk her way out of it. Anyways, "Well, I observed to him that you were unused to company. I did not think you would like appearing before so gay a party, all strangers." And he replied in his quick way, "Nonsense. If she objects, tell her, and it is my peculiar..." Mr. Rochester is requiring her presence. He says it's his peculiar wish, and if she resists, say I shall come and fetch her in case of contumacy. "I will not give him that trouble," I answered. "I will go, if no better may be, but I don't like it. Shall you be there, Mrs. Fairfax?" "No." I played off and admitted my plea. "I tell you how to manage so as to avoid the embarrassment of making a formal entrance, which is most disagreeable part of this business. You must go into the drawing room while it is empty, before the ladies leave the dinner table. Choose your seat in any quiet nook you like. You need not stay long after the gentlemen come in, unless you please. Just let Mr. Rochester see you are there, and then slip away. Nobody will notice you." "Will these people remain long, do you think?" "Perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, certainly not more. After the Easter recess, Sir George Lynn, who was lately elected member of Millcote, will have to go up into town and take his seat. I dare say Mr. Rochester will accompany him. It surprises me that he's already made so protracted a stay at Thornfield." It was with some trepidation that I perceived the hour approach when I was to repair with my charge to the drawing room. Adele had been in a state of ecstasy all day after hearing she was to be presented to the ladies in the evening, and it was not till Sophie commenced the operation of dressing her that she sobered down. Then the importance of the process quickly steadied her, and by the time she had her curls arranged in well-smoothed, drooping clusters, her pink satin frock put on, her long sash tied, and her lace mittens adjusted, she looked as grave as any judge. No need to warn her not to disarrange her attire. When she was dressed, she sat demurely down in her little chair, taking care previously to lift up her satin skirt for fear she would crease it, and assured me that she would not stir thence till I was ready. This quickly was. My breast dress, the silver gray one, purchased for Mrs. Temple's wedding and never worn since, was soon put on. My hair was soon smoothed, my sole ornament, the pearl brooch, soon assumed, and we descended. Fortunately, there was another entrance to the drawing room that through the saloon where they were all seated at dinner. Through the saloon, so she wasn't seen. Not Adele. Jane just doesn't want to be seen. We found the apartment vacant, the large fire burning silently on the marble earth, and wax candles shining in bright solitude amid the exquisite flowers with which the tables were adorned. The crimson curtain hung before the... Okay, Jane has snuck in, and Mrs. Fairfax has given her help. And essentially, the crimson curtains hung before the arch, slight as it was, the separation, the drapery formed from the party in the adjoining saloon. They spoke in so low a key that nothing of their conversation could be distinguished beyond a soothing murmur. Adele, who appeared to be still under the influence of most solemnizing impression, sat down, without a word, on the footstool I pointed out to her. I retired to a window seat and took a book from a table near, endeavoring to read. Adele by her stool neared to my feet. Ere long she touched my knee. What is it, Adele? Something in French. You think too much of your toilette, Adele, but you may have a flower. And I took a rose from a vase and fastened it to her sash. She sighed a sigh of ineffable satisfaction, as if her cup of happiness were now full. I turned my face away to conceal a smile I could not suppress. There was something ludicrous as well as painful in the little Parisian's earnest and innate devotion to matters of dress. Adele says she gonna look good regardless, and that's what I respect. A soft sound of rising now became audible. The curtain was swept back from the arch, though it appeared the dining room, which its lit lustre pouring down light on the silver and glass of a magnificent dessert service conveying a long table. A band of ladies stood in the opening. They entered, and the curtain fell behind them. They were but 8. Yet somehow, as they flocked in, they gave the impression of a much larger number. Some of them were very tall, many were dressed in white, and all a sweeping amplitude of array that seemed to magnify their persons as a mist magnifies the room. I rose and curtsied to them. One of 2 bent their heads in return. The others only stared at me. I bet the 1 or 2 are probably those twins. They dispersed about the room, reminding me by the lightness and buoyancy of their movements of a flock of white plumy birds. Some of them threw themselves into reclining position on the sofas and ottomans. Some bent over the tables and examined the flowers and books. The rest gathered in a group around the fire. All talked in low but clear tones which seemed habitual to them. I knew their names afterwards, and many of them well mentioned them now. And may as well mention them now. Okay, she's about to list it off. Okay, first there was Mrs. Eshton and 2 of her daughters. She had evidently been a handsome woman and was well preserved still. Of her daughters, the eldest, Amy, was right. We have Amy, who's a little naive right now, and it says she's childlike in face and manner and little in form. Her white muslin dress and blue sash became her well. The second, Louisa, was taller and more elegant in figure and very pretty in face. In that order, the French term menoir chiffon. Both sisters were fair as lilies. Lady Lynn was a large and stout personage, about 40, very erect and very haughty looking, richly dressed in a satin robe of changeful sheen. Her dark hair shone glossily under the shade of azure plum, and within the circlet of a band of jewels. Mrs. Colonel Dent was less showy, but I thought more ladylike. She had a slight figure, a pale, gentle face, and fair hair. Her black satin dress, her scarf of rich foreign lace, and her pearl ornaments pleased me better than the rainbow radiance of the titled dame. But the 3 most distinguished, partly perhaps because the tallest figures of the band were the Dowager Lady Ingram and her daughters, Blanche and Mary. They were all three of the loftiest stature of women. The Dowager might be between 40 and 50. Her shape was still fine, her hair by candlelight at least still black. Her teeth, too, were still apparently perfect. Most people would have deemed her a splendid woman of her age, and so she was, no doubt, physically speaking. But then there was an expression of almost insupportable haughtiness in her bearing and countenance. She had Roman features and a double chin, disappearing into a throat like a pillar. These features appeared to me not only inflated and darkened, but even furrowed with pride, and the chin, it was sustained by the same principle. In a position almost preternatural erectness. Oh, she always had her head up. Hell. Okay. She had likewise a fierce and hard eye. It reminded me of Mrs. Reed's. She mouthed her words in speaking. Her voice was deep, its inflections very pompous, very dogmatical, very intolerable. In short, a crimson velvet robe and a shawl turban of some gold-wrought Indian fabric invested her. I suppose she thought with a truly imperial dignity. Blanche and Mary were of equal stature, straight and tall as poplars. Mary was too slim for her height, but Blanche was molded like a Dian. I regarded her, of course, with special interest. First, I wished to see whether her appearance accorded with Mrs. Fairfax's description. Secondly, whether it all resembled the fancy miniature I had painted of her. And thirdly, it will out whether it were such as I should fancy like to suit a Mr. Rochester's taste. Okay, so she want to see if what she look like, if she look like what I thought she would look like, and if Mr. Rochester want him. As far as person went, she answered point for point, both to my picture and Mrs. Fairfax's description. The noble bust, the sloping shoulders, the graceful neck, the dark eyes and black ringlets were all there. But her face was like her mother's, a youthful, unfurled likeness. The same low brow, the same high features, the same pride. It was not, however, so saturating in pride. She laughed continually. Her laugh was satirical, and so was the habitual expression of her arched and haughty lip. Genius is said to be self-conscious. I cannot tell whether Miss Ingram was a genius, but she was self-conscious, remarkably self-conscious indeed. She entered into a discourse on botany with the gentle Mrs. Dent. It seemed Mrs. Dent had not studied that science, though, as she said, she liked flowers, especially wild ones. Miss Ingram had, and she ran over its vocabulary with an air. I presently perceived she was what is vernacularly termed trailing Mrs. Dent, that is, playing on her ignorance. Her trail might be clever, but it was decidedly not good-natured. She played. Her execution was brilliant. She sang. Her voice is fine. She talked French, apart to her mamma, and she talked it well, with fluency and with a good accent. Mary had a milder and more open countenance than Blanche, softer features too, and a skin some shades fairer than Miss Ingram, as she was dark as a Spaniard. But Mary was deficient in life. Her face lacked expression, her eye lustre. She had nothing to say, and having once taken her seat, remained fixed like a statue in its niche. The sisters were both attired in spotless white. And did I now think Mrs. Ingram such a choice as Mr. Rochester would likely be to make? I could not tell. I did not know his taste in female beauty. If he liked the majestic, she was the very type of majesty. Oh my God, I can't read. If he liked the majestic, she was the very type of majesty. Then she was accomplished, sprightly. Most gentlemen would admire her. I thought in that he did admire her. I already seemed to have obtained proof. To remove the last shade of doubt, it remained but to see them together. You are not to suppose, reader, that Adele had... So Blanche seems like the type of girl... She got it. She just a little, she knows she got it. So she got it. She ain't humble. Anyways, it says, you're not supposed, you're not to suppose, reader, that this entire time that Adele has been on her best behavior, because that's not the truth. Like, Miss Adele been acting a fool. It says, Adele, when the ladies entered, rose, advanced to meet them, made a stately reverence, and said with gravity, "Bonjour, madames." And Miss Ingram had looked down at her with a mocking air and exclaimed, "Oh, what a little puppet." Lady Lynn had remarked, "It is Mr. Rochester's ward, I suppose, the little French girl he's speaking of." Mrs. Dent had kindly taken her hand and given her a kiss. Amy and Louisa Eshton had cried out simultaneously, "What a love of a child!" Okay, her man back. She's looking at him. It says, "I distinctly behold his figure, and I inevitably recall the moment when I last saw it, just after I rendered him what he deemed an essential service. Last time I saw you, I saved your life, and you was gonna leave. And he, holding my hand and looking down on my face, surveyed me with eyes that revealed a heart full and eager to overflow, and whose emotions I had a part. How near had I approached him at that moment? What had occurred since, calculated to change his and my relative positions? Yet now, how distant, how far estranged we were. So far estranged that I did not expect him to come and speak to me. I did not wonder when, without looking at me, he took a seat at the other side of the room and began conversing with some of the ladies. I'm not about to watch my man with other women. I'm not about to do it. Anyways, it says, "No sooner did I see that his attention was riveted on them that I might gaze without being observed, than my eyes were drawn involuntarily to his face. I could not keep their lids under control, that would rise, and the irids would fix on him. I looked and had an acute pleasure in looking, a precious yet poignant pleasure in pure gold, with the steely point of agony, a pleasure like what the thirst perishing man might yet feel who knows the well to which he has crept is poisoned, yet stoops and drinks divine draughts nevertheless." I shouldn't look, but I might. It says, "Most true it is that beauty is in the eye of the gazer. My master's colorless olive face, square, massive brow, proud and jetty eyebrows, deep eyes, strong features, firm, grim mouth, all energy, decision, will, were not beautiful according to rule, but they were more than beautiful to me. They were full of an interest and influence that quite mastered me, that took my feelings from my own power and fettered them in his. I had not intended to love him. The reader knows I have wrought hard to extirpate from my soul the germs of the love that were detected. And now, at the first renewed view of him, the spontaneously revived green and strong, he made me love him without looking at me. This is so sweet. I compared him with his guests. What was the gallant grace of the lens, the languid elegance of Lord Ingram, even the military distinction of Colonel Dent contrasted with his look of naive pith and genuine power. I had no sympathy in their appearance, their expression, yet I could imagine that most observers would call them attractive. Imagining that most observers would call him attractive, handsome, imposing, while they were pronounced Mr. Rochester at once harsh-featured and melancholy-looking. I saw them smile, laugh, and it was nothing. The light of the candles had as much soul in them as their smile, the tinkle of the bell as much significance as their laugh. I saw Mr. Rochester smile. His stern features softened, his eye grew both brilliant and gentle, its ray both searching and sweet. He was talking at the moment to Louisa and Amy Eshton. I wondered to see them receive with calm the look which seemed to be so penetrating. I expected their eyes to fall, their color to rise under it, yet I was glad when I found they were in no sense moved. He is not to them what he is to me. I thought, he is not of their kind. I believe he is of mine. I am sure he is. I feel akin to him. I understand the language of his countenance and movements, though rank and wealth sever us widely. I have something in my brain and heart, in my blood and nerves, that assimilates me mentally to him. Did I say a few days since that I had nothing to do with him but to receive my salary at his hands? Did I forbid myself to think of him in any other light than as my paymaster? Blasphemy against nature. Every good, true, vigorous feeling I have gathers impulsively round him. I know I must conceal my sentiments. I must smother hope. I must remember that he cannot care much for me. For when I say I am of his kind, I do not mean that I have his force to influence and his spell to attract. I mean only that I have certain tastes and feelings in common with him. I must then repeat continually that we are and forever sundered, and yet, while I breathe and think, I must love him. Coffee is handed. The ladies, since the gentlemen have entered, have become more lively, as larks. Conversation waxes brisk and merry. Colonel Dent and Mr. Ashton argue on politics. Their wives listen. The two proud dowagers, Lady Lynn and Lady Ingram, confabulate together. Sir George, whom, by the by, I had forgotten to describe, a very big and very fashionable country-looking gentleman, stands before their sofa, coffee cup in hand, and occasionally puts in a word. Mr. Frederick Lynn has taken a seat beside Mary Ingram, and is showing her the engravings of a splendid volume. She looks, smiles now and then, but apparently says little. The tall and phlegmatic Lord Ingram leans with folded arms on the chair back of the little and lively Amy Ashton. She glances up at him and chatters like a wren. She likes him better than she does Mr. Rochester. Henry Lynn. I'm honestly not keeping track of these people, but I kind of just like the description of it. It's weird. It says Henry Lynn has taken possession on the ottoman at the feet of Louisa. Adele shares it with him. He's trying to talk French with her, and Louisa laughs at his blunders. With whom will Blanche Ingram pair? She is standing alone at the table, bending gracefully over an album. She seems waiting to be shot, but she will not wait too long. She herself selects a mate. Mr. Rochester, having quitted the Ashton, stands on the hearth of a solitary stands on the earth, solitary, as she stands by the table. She confronts him, taking her station on the opposite side of the mantelpiece. Mr. Rochester, I thought you were not fond of children. Nor am I. Then what induced you to take charge of that little doll? Pointing to Adele. Where did you pick her up? I did not pick her up. She was left in my hands. You should have sent her to school. I could not afford it. Schools are so dear. Why, I suppose you have a governess for her. I saw a person with her just now. Is she gone? Oh, no, there she is, still behind the window curtain. You pay her, of course. I should think it quite as expensive, more so, for you have to keep them both in addition. I feared, or should I say hoped, the allusion to me would make Mr. Rochester glance my way, and I involuntarily shrank further into the shade, but he never turned his eyes. I have not considered the subject, said he indifferently, looking straight before him. No, you men never do consider economy and common sense. You should hear Mamma on the chapter of governesses. Mary and I have had, I should think, a dozen at least in our day, half of them detestable and the rest ridiculous, and all incubi. Were they not, Mamma? Did you speak, my own? The young lady thus claimed as the dowager's special property reiterated her question with an explanation. My dearest, don't mention governesses. The word makes me nervous. I've suffered a martyrdom from their incompetency and caprice. I thank heaven I have now done with them. Mrs. Dent here bent over to the pious lady and whispered something in her ear. I suppose from the answer elicited, it was a reminder that one of the anathematized race was present. Anyways, Jane was present. Y'all talking about me and I'm fucking here. Like, damn, bitch. Tant piss, said her ladyship. I hope it may do her good. Oh, she said, I said what I said. She stood on it. 10 toes down. She said, I said what I said. Okay. She said, I hope it may do her some good. Then a lower tone, but still loud enough for me to hear. I noticed her. I'm a judge of physiognomy. In hers, I see all the faults of her class. That baby basically said, I looked at him and I don't like him. Anyways, what are they, madame? Inquired Mr. Rochester aloud. I will tell you in your private ear, replied she, wagging her turban 3 times with portentous significancy. But my curiosity will be past its appetite. It craves food now. Axe Blanche, she is nearer you than I. Oh, don't refer him to me, Mamma. I have just one word to say of the whole tribe. They're a nuisance. Not that I ever suffered much from them. I took care to turn the tables. What tricks Theodore and I would play on Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Gray's and Madame Jobert's. Mary was always too sleepy to join in with a plot of spirit. The best fun was with Madame Jobert. Miss Wilson was a poor, sickly thing, low-spirited, not worth the trouble of vanquishing, in short, and Mrs. Gray was coarse and insensible. No block took effect on her, but poor Madame Joubert. I see her yet in raging passions. When we had driven her to extremity, spilt our tea, crumpled our bread and butter, tossed our books up to the ceiling, and prayed a chivalry with the ruler and desk, the fender and fire irons. Theodore, do you remember these merry days? Okay, so they mess with their teacher. Y'all bad as hell. Y'all need to get spanked. Anyways, yes, to be sure, I do draw Lord Ingram. And the poor old stick used to cry out, "Oh, you villainous child." And then we sermonized her on the presumption of attempting to teach such clever blades as we were when she was herself so ignorant. Bad kids. Y'all bad and rich. Bad, rich, and white ain't good compliment. But anyways. Well, anyway, they're bad. They're bad kids. It was bad. Okay, it says, we did. And Tito, you know, I helped you in prosecuting or persecuting your tutor. Way-faced Mr. Vinings, the person in the pip, and we used to call him. He and Miss Wilson took the liberty of falling in love with each other, at least Tito and I thought so. We surprised sundry. Okay, this is bad. Wade faced Mr. Vining, the parson in the pip, as we used to call him. He and Mrs. Wilson took the liberty of falling in love with each other. At least Teddo and I thought so. We surprised sundry tender glances and sighs, which we interpreted as tokens of la belle passion. And I promise you the public room had the benefit of our discovery. We employed it as a sort of lever to hoist our dead weights from the house. Dear Mamma, there, as soon as she got an inkling of the business, found out that it was of immoral tendency. Did you not, Lady Mother? So I'm trying to figure out if the people actually fell in love or if they just accused their teachers of falling in love and got them fired. Because it seemed like the brother... Okay, flash forward. Blanche and her brother is bad kids, as usual. Bad parenting, not on the tutor, not on the governesses. And we're going to skip ahead. I see insolence, accompanying mutiny and general blow-up. Am I right, Baroness Ingram of Ingram Park? My Lily Fowler, you are right now, as always. Okay, so the Ingrams are basically bragging about how they is bad. And then Amy Ashton chimes in. Louisa and I used to quiz our governess too, but she was such a good creature. She would bear anything. Nothing put her out. She was never cross with us. Was she, Louisa? No, never. We might do what we pleased, ransack her desk and her workbox and turn her drawers inside out, and she was so good-natured. She would give us anything we asked for. I suppose now, said Miss Ingram, cutting her lip sarcastically, we shall have an abstract of the memoirs of all the governesses extant. In order to avert such a visitation, I again move the introduction of a new topic. Mr. Rochester, do you second my motion? Madam, I support you on this point as on every other. Interesting. Madam, I support you on this point as on every other. He has this way of interacting with her, and I noticed this in the movie, that is very like, it seems like he's in agreement with her, but it also, it's like a double entendre. Like it has like a, it's like pointed. I don't know. Anyways, it says, okay, then on me be the, okay. They talk so extra. She asking somebody to sing. Somebody's singing something. I'm not about to read that. I feel guilty. I'm going to skip over this. Hold on. Miss Ingram, who had now seated herself with proud grace at the piano, spreading out her snowy robes in queenly amplitude, commenced a brilliant prelude, talking meantime. She appeared to be on her high horse tonight. Both her words and her air seemed intend to excite not only the admiration but the amusement of her auditors. She was evidently bent on striking them as something very dashing and daring indeed. Oh, I'm so sick of the young men of the present day, exclaimed she, rattling away at the instrument. Poor puny things not fit to stir a step beyond papa's park gates, nor to go even so far without Mama's permission and guardianship. Yeah, talk your shit. Creatures so absorbed in care about their pretty faces and their white hands and their small feet, as if a man had anything to do with beauty, as if loveliness were not the special prerogative of a woman, her legitimate appanage and her heritage. I grant an ugly woman is a blot on the fair face of creation. But as to gentlemen, let them be solicitous to possess only strength and valor. Let their motto be hunt, shoot, and fight. The rest is not worth a fillip. Such should be my advice were I a man. That is the most... I don't like Blanche in this character because I'm like, she's portrayed to be beautiful, and I just hate when you perpetuate the misogyny towards yourself, because I know you yourself have been limited to the way that you look. So I'm like, why are you just a pick-me? She's a pick-me. Okay. Whenever I marry, she continued after a pause which none interrupted, I'm resolved my husband shall not be a rival, but a foil to me. I don't like pretty men either, but I will suffer no competitor near the throne. I shall exact an undivided homage. His devotion shall not be shared between me and the shape he sees in his mirror. Mr. Rochester, now sing and I will play for you. I understand, but not for the reason that she's like, no. And then he says, I'm all obedience. And that was the response. Here then is a song. Know that I dote on corsairs, and for that reason sing it con spirito. Commands from Miss Ingram's lips would put spirit into a mug of milk and water. Take care then. If you don't please me, I will shame you by showing how such singing should be done. Okay, they're having a banter, whatever. Bra, 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 banter, banter, banter. Jane. Now is my time to slip away, thought I. But the tones that then severed the air arrested me. So she's trying to leave, and then Mrs. Fairfax had said, Mr. Rochester possessed a fine voice. He did. A mellow, powerful bass, into which he threw his own feeling, his own force, finding a way through to the ear and the heart, and there waking sensation strangely. I waited till the last deep and full vibration had expired, till the tide of talk, checked an instant, had resumed its flow. Okay, so he sang, they stopped. I then quitted my sheltered corner and made my exit by the side door, which was fortunately near. Thence a narrow passage led into the hall, and crossing it, I perceived my sandal was loose. I stopped to tie it, kneeling down for that purpose on the mat at the foot of the staircase. I heard the dining room door unclose, and a gentleman came out. Rising hastily, I stood face to face with him. It was Mr. Rochester. How do you do? He asked. I am very well, sir. Why did you not come and speak to me in the room? I thought I might have retorted the question on him who put it, but I would not take that freedom. I answered. I did not wish to disturb you, as you seemed engaged, sir. What have you been doing during my absence? Nothing particular. Teaching Adele as usual, and getting a good deal paler than you were, as I saw it at first sight. What is the matter? Nothing at all, sir. Did you take any cold that night? You half drowned me. Half drowned me. Yeah, that's what happened. Not the least. Return to the drawing room. You are deserting too early. I am tired, sir. He looked at me for a minute, and a little depressed, he said, What about? Tell me. I've never understood in this moment if he was just wanting her to like admit a feeling, because it just kind of felt like you were poking at it. Like, you guys just sat there and talked about how governesses were trash, and you just sat there and let this woman talk about how ugly women are a stain on creation. You let this other woman's mother talk about this woman's physiognomy, basically to say you're ugly, and you're not worthy to be fed, and you're not worthy to be here or to teach. And then you let this woman continue to brag about how she tortured her pretty governess. So she had a governess, and it's not even about looks, it's just about y'all want to be mean to people. And then you're gonna sit here and ask me what's wrong, and you know how I feel about that. Anyways, she says, Nothing, sir. I'm not depressed. But I affirm that you are. So much depressed that a few more words would bring tears to your eyes. Indeed, they are there now, shining and swimming, and a bead has slipped from the lash and fallen onto the flag. If I had time and was not in mortal dread of some prating prig of a certain passing, I would know what all this means. Well, tonight I excuse you, but understand that so long as my visitors stay, I expect you to appear in the drawing room every evening. It is my wish. Do not neglect it. Now go and send Sophie for Adele. Good night, my... He stopped, bit his lip, and abruptly left. I'm like, did he want to make her jealous, or was this just to show her that he could be with somebody else, and that's not what he wants? I don't know. I'm gonna think about it. But I'm on to 18. I've been neglecting this because I've been yelling at the president. Also, 17 and 18 are kind of long. So until next time, so long.